You're a coward, Caldwell. Bryce Harrington's voice cut through the hum of the upscale Manhattan lounge, his smirk dripping with amusement. All that money, all that power, and you're still playing it safe. Damian Caldwell leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The insult didn't faze him. Bryce had been throwing them around since they were college rivals. But tonight, something was different. Bryce wasn't just mocking him. He was daring him. Safe. Damian echoed, arching a brow. Because I don't waste my time with foolish risks? Bryce leaned forward, his grin widening. No, because you're predictable. You always win, but it's never interesting. You manipulate, you conquer, and then you move on. But what if, just once, you did something truly reckless? Damian's lips twitched, a shadow of amusement crossing his face. And what, exactly, do you have in mind? The table erupted in laughter. Their circle of billionaires, heirs, and CEOs thrived on games like this. Stakes were their currency. Bryce tapped a finger against the rim of his glass. I bet you wouldn't last a year married to a woman who doesn't fit your world. Someone plain. Someone you'd never choose. No trophies, no models, just a nobody. And you have to make it real. No cheating, no side affairs. A full year of wedded bliss. The laughter died down. Even among men who thrived on excess, this was a different kind of gamble. Damian's jaw tightened. You think I can't do it? He asked, his voice controlled, but his eyes sharper now. I think you won't, Bryce corrected. Because deep down, you're just as shallow as the rest of us. Damian took a slow sip of his drink, considering. This wasn't about the bet anymore. This was about proving Bryce wrong. Proving everyone wrong. I'll do it, Damian said, setting his glass down with a quiet click against the marble table. And when I do, I expect you to disappear from my business deals permanently. Bryce's grin didn't falter. Done. He extended a hand. Damian shook it, sealing the deal. The game was on. Damian didn't believe in fate, but it was almost too easy. 2 days after the bet, he spotted Eleanor Dawson in a downtown cafe, lost in a book. She was exactly what Bryce had described. A woman he'd never look at twice. No designer labels, no carefully styled hair, no effort to impress. Glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, she was completely absorbed in whatever literary world she was lost in. Perfect. Damian approached without hesitation. Is the book that good? Eleanor glanced up, startled. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent. Not the response he expected. Excuse me? I asked if the book is that good, he repeated smoothly. You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here. She studied him for a moment, unimpressed. Are you always this direct with strangers? Damian smiled. Only when I see something intriguing. Eleanor snorted, snapping her book shut. Let me guess. This is where you tell me you're different from other men, right? Damian blinked. Women didn't usually dismiss him this quickly. I wasn't going to say that, but now I'm tempted, he admitted, his amusement genuine. Eleanor sighed, slipping her book into her bag. Look, if you're looking for someone to stroke your ego, I'm not the one. I'm busy and I don't do games. Damian tilted his head. What if I told you I wasn't playing one? Then I'd say you're lying. She shot back without hesitation. Something about her intrigued him. She wasn't flustered, wasn't trying to impress him. It made her the perfect choice. I have a proposal, he said, watching her reaction carefully. A marriage. No romance, no expectations. Just a contract. For the first time, Eleanor hesitated. Are you insane? She asked. Not at all. You get financial security. I get what I need. And after a year, we go our separate ways. Eleanor should have laughed in his face. She should have walked away. But she didn't. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his complete surprise, she asked, Why me? Damian smiled. Because you're different. Eleanor didn't believe him, but for reasons she kept to herself, she said, Fine. But under one condition. Damian leaned in, curious. Which is? You don't get to ask me why I said yes. He studied her for a long moment, but in the end, he simply nodded. Deal. Neither of them realized that this deal would cost them both far more than they'd ever imagined. Eleanor Dawson wasn't an impulsive woman. She calculated everything, her time, her risks, the weight of every decision before making it. That was why her students at Roosevelt High trusted her judgment, why she never wasted her words, and why she should have walked out of that cafe the moment Damian Caldwell had uttered the word marriage. Instead, she had said yes. Now, she sat in the back of a sleek black car, staring out the tinted window as the Manhattan skyline blurred past. The silence between her and Damian was thick, but not uncomfortable. He seemed content to ignore her, checking his phone as if this wasn't the most absurd arrangement of his life. Ellie should have felt regret, but she didn't. "What's going on in that mind of yours?" Damian's voice was smooth, barely curious. He hadn't looked up from his screen. Ellie crossed her arms. "Just wondering what kind of man makes a proposal like this and expects an immediate yes. One who's used to getting what he wants," he said without hesitation. That, at least, was honest. The car pulled up to a pristine high-rise in the Upper East Side, all glass and steel. Ellie had expected a hotel, but no, this was his home, his world, and now, for the next year, hers. The moment they stepped into the penthouse, she took in everything at once. Clean, modern lines, furniture that looked as though no one had ever actually sat on it, a floor-to-ceiling window revealing a breathtaking view of the city. But the place had no warmth. No sign of him. "I assume you don't care where you sleep," Damian said, already moving toward what she guessed was his office. "There's a guest room down the hall. It's yours now. You'll find everything you need." Ellie hesitated. "That's it?" Damian finally turned. "You expected a honeymoon suite?" "Not exactly," she said dryly. His lips twitched, but the amusement never reached his eyes. "I'll have my lawyer send over the contract tomorrow. Standard legal protections, financial arrangements, and a confidentiality clause. Once it's signed, we'll move forward with the wedding." Ellie arched a brow. "Romantic. I wasn't aware you were expecting romance." "Fair point." She glanced around. "So, what am I supposed to do until then?" "Live your life," Damian said. "We're married on paper, not in reality. I have no intention of interfering with whatever you do, as long as you maintain the public image required." Ellie considered him. "And what image is that?" "The devoted wife of a billionaire, of course." There it was, that arrogance, that effortless control. She knew his type. And yet, here she was, agreeing to this madness. Ellie turned away before he could see whatever emotion flickered across her face. "Understood. Let me know when I need to play my part." She left him standing there, unreadable as ever. The wedding was a transaction. No family, no friends, no church bells or floral arrangements. A private ceremony in the office of a high-profile judge, where Damian signed his name with all the emotional investment of someone approving a real estate deal. Ellie kept her expression neutral, though she could feel the weight of the pen in her own hand as she scribbled her name across the marriage certificate. When it was done, Damian turned to her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Caldwell." Her stomach twisted at the name. Not from nerves, not from excitement, just awareness. "Are we supposed to kiss now?" she asked dryly. Damian smirked. "Do you want to?" Ellie's silence was answer enough. He chuckled, offering his arm instead. "Come on, wife. We have a dinner reservation." They exited the courthouse like they had just closed a business deal, which in a way, they had. The restaurant was exquisite. One of those exclusive places with no sign on the door, where people like Damian Caldwell never had to wait for a table. The moment they entered, eyes flicked toward them. Whispers started. "Is that Caldwell? And who the hell is she?" Ellie ignored it. She'd dealt with worse in her life. Damian led her to their table, pulling out her chair as if he actually cared about etiquette. But when he sat down across from her, his gaze sharpened. "You're remarkably composed," he observed. "I expected nerves." Ellie shrugged. "I'm good at adapting." Damian leaned back, studying her. "I should warn you. People will start asking questions. Some will dig. I know how to keep my mouth shut," she said. "Good." A pause. Then, out of nowhere, Damian asked, "Why did you say yes?" Ellie's hand tightened around her wine glass. She had given him one rule. "That's none of your concern," she said evenly. Damian exhaled. but he didn't push. And for now, that was enough. But she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Ellie didn't expect a honeymoon phase. Still, she thought there would be something, a conversation, an acknowledgement, even a hint of awkwardness. But Damien treated their marriage like a contract filed away in a drawer, settled and forgotten. After the wedding, they returned to the penthouse in silence. No champagne, no forced celebrations, just Damien removing his suit jacket, loosening his tie, and disappearing into his office like nothing had changed. For him, it hadn't. Ellie took a deep breath and wandered into what was now her bedroom, a guest suite that, despite its elegance, felt more like a hotel than a home. It was pristine, cold, untouched, kind of like her husband. She kicked off her heels, unpinned her hair, and collapsed onto the bed. This was her life now. Days passed, then a week. Damien worked late and left early. Their interactions were minimal, mostly quiet exchanges over breakfast, where he skimmed the news and she sipped her coffee. He never asked about her day. He never offered details about his. If it weren't for the whispers in the media, Ellie could have convinced herself she wasn't married at all. The first article surfaced 3 days after the wedding. Billionaire Damien Caldwell's surprise marriage. Who is Eleanor Dawson? There was no warmth to it. No fairy tale romance. Just speculation, scrutiny, and the subtle suggestion that Ellie was either incredibly lucky or hiding something. She ignored it. But ignoring the world was easier than ignoring the way Damien seemed completely unaffected. They attended a charity gala together, their first public appearance as husband and wife. Damien played the part effortlessly, hand at the small of her back, perfectly timed smiles, a quiet whisper in her ear for the cameras. She should have expected it. He wasn't just rich, he was calculated. Everything he did served a purpose, and tonight's purpose was showing the world that Eleanor Dawson, a nobody, was now Eleanor Caldwell. "Smile," he murmured, just as another camera flashed. Ellie tilted her head toward him, lips curving into something effortless. "You don't have to remind me," she replied, voice low but steady. Damien glanced at her then, as if seeing her for the first time that night. "Good," he said. Then he was gone, swept into a sea of investors, CEOs, and people who actually mattered to him. Ellie wasn't surprised. She made her way to the bar, feeling the weight of curious glances and hushed speculation around her. A woman in a crimson dress sidled up beside her, twirling the stem of her martini glass. "So, you're the new Mrs. Caldwell." Ellie took a sip of her drink before answering. "So they tell me." The woman chuckled. "Relax. I'm not about to ask if it's real." That caught Ellie's attention. She turned, studying the woman properly. Blonde, effortlessly elegant, with the kind of self-assurance that came from knowing she belonged in places like this. "You know Damien well?" Ellie asked. "Well enough." The woman smiled. "Vivian Grant. We used to work together." Ellie didn't react, but she recognized the careful wording. Vivian leaned in slightly. "Word of advice? If you want to keep up, don't play by his rules. Make your own." Ellie's fingers tightened around her glass. "And what do you think my rules are?" Vivian smirked. "That's what I'm waiting to find out." Before Ellie could respond, Damien was suddenly beside her, his presence a quiet but undeniable force. "Vivian," he greeted smoothly. "Damien," she replied, her expression unreadable. Then, to Ellie, "It was nice meeting you, Mrs. Caldwell." She walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ellie turned to Damien. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," he said. No elaboration, no explanation. Ellie didn't press. She knew what she was to him. A role, a contract. But if Vivian was right, maybe it was time to stop playing by his rules. Later that night, Damien worked in his office, his usual ritual of expensive whiskey and silence. Ellie stood in the doorway, watching him. "You have something to say? Or do you enjoy lurking?" Damien's voice was casual, but his focus remained on his laptop. Ellie crossed her arms. "Vivian Grant." That got his attention. His gaze flicked up, sharp but unreadable. "What about her?" "She's interesting," Ellie said. "Knows how to navigate a room. Knows how to read people." Damien exhaled, closing his laptop. "If you're fishing for a history lesson, You'll be disappointed. Ellie shrugged. I'm not. Just thought it was curious. Curious? She stepped further into the room. The way she looked at me, like she wasn't sure if I was a fool or a player. Damien studied her for a long moment. Then, instead of answering, he smirked. And which are you? Ellie didn't blink. Guess you'll find out. She turned and left, her footsteps fading down the hall. Damien remained where he was, fingers resting against his glass. For the first time since this arrangement began, he wasn't entirely sure what game was being played, and that unsettled him more than it should have. Ellie knew something had shifted the night of the gala. Not drastically, Damien Caldwell wasn't a man easily rattled, but subtly, in the way he'd watched her walk away, as if, for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure what to make of her. She didn't mind that uncertainty, because, truthfully, she was still figuring it out herself. Their marriage was a carefully constructed illusion, an arrangement designed to serve his interests. And yet, standing at the edge of his world, Ellie was beginning to realize something neither of them had anticipated. She wasn't just playing her role. She was studying him. And Damien, for all his arrogance and control, had cracks in his armor. 2 days after the gala, Ellie found herself in a place she never expected, Caldwell Enterprises headquarters. She hadn't planned on coming, but after waking up to yet another article dissecting their marriage, she figured it was time to step out of the background. Damien hadn't told her much about his company. He didn't need to. His name alone carried weight in every financial sector imaginable: tech, real estate, venture capital. He built things. He destroyed things. He moved markets with a single decision. And yet, here he was, avoiding her as if she were the biggest inconvenience in his carefully calculated life. That ended today. Ellie stepped out of the sleek black car, straightened her coat, and walked through the glass doors of Caldwell Enterprises. The receptionist blinked up at her in surprise. Mrs. Caldwell, the woman said, flustered. Mr. Caldwell didn't mention that I exist? Ellie finished smoothly. Yes, I imagine he forgets sometimes. The receptionist paled. I didn't mean. Ellie offered a small smile. Relax. I just need to see my husband. Of course. Let me. No need. A voice interrupted. Ellie turned to find a man in his late 40s, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed boardroom politics. His sharp, assessing gaze swept over her in an instant. Nicholas Royce, he said, extending a hand. CFO of Caldwell Enterprises. Ellie shook it. Eleanor Caldwell. His lips twitched. I'm aware. Your presence has been unexpected. Ellie tilted her head. You say that like it's a bad thing. Not at all, Nicholas said smoothly. Only that Damien doesn't usually entertain. He hesitated, then amended. Distractions during business hours. Ellie smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. How lucky for me, then, that I'm not a distraction. Nicholas studied her for a beat, then gestured toward the elevators. Follow me. Ellie didn't miss the way people watched as she passed. Curious, surprised, some outright whispering. So, Damien had done more than just keep their marriage low profile. He'd made sure she wasn't part of this world at all. Interesting. Nicholas led her to the top floor, where glass walls framed an office far too pristine for a man who allegedly ran an empire. Damien stood near his desk, his phone pressed to his ear. The moment he saw Ellie, his entire body tensed. I'll call you back, he said abruptly, hanging up. Ellie offered a small wave. Surprise. His jaw ticked. What are you doing here? Ellie shrugged. Just thought I'd drop by. See my husband. Maybe learn a little about what he actually does all day. Nicholas made a noise that sounded suspiciously like amusement before clearing his throat. I'll leave you two alone. The moment the door clicked shut, Damien exhaled sharply. You can't just show up here, he said. Why not? Ellie asked. Afraid people will realize your wife actually exists? Damien's gaze darkened. That's not. He stopped himself, then ran a hand through his hair. What do you want, Ellie? She studied him, the way tension coiled in his shoulders, the slight edge in his voice. You keep me at a distance, she said simply. I figured I'd close it. His expression flickered. So brief, she almost missed it. Ellie, he said, his tone quieter now. This isn't personal. She let out a soft laugh. Of course it's not. Nothing about you ever is. A silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Damien exhaled. Fine. You want to know what I do all day? I'll show you. Ellie raised a brow. Just like that. His mouth curved slightly. You're my wife, aren't you? She didn't miss the challenge in his tone, but she wasn't the one who should be worried. Because, for the first time, Damien Caldwell had invited her into his world, and she had every intention of staying. Ellie learned quickly that Damien's world wasn't just about money and power. It was about perception. And perception, in his world, was everything. 2 days after she'd walked into Caldwell Enterprises unannounced, a crisp ivory invitation arrived at the penthouse, placed neatly on her bedside table as if it had appeared out of thin air. The Harrington Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Ellie stared at the embossed gold lettering, then at the name at the bottom. Bryce Harrington. Damien hadn't mentioned it. He didn't need to. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The night of the event, Ellie stood in front of the full-length mirror in the walk-in closet she rarely used. The gown Damien's assistant had sent was classic and understated. Black, floor-length, with delicate beading along the bodice. Elegant. Safe. A perfect billionaire's wife kind of dress. She hated it. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Don't play by his rules. Make your own. Ellie reached for the deep emerald dress hanging at the back of the closet, a dress she'd bought herself, with no input from anyone else. It wasn't just elegant. It was bold. A dress that demanded attention rather than deflected it. And tonight, that was exactly what she wanted. When Ellie stepped into the penthouse living room, Damien was already waiting. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo, his usual unbothered mask firmly in place, until he looked up. For the first time since their wedding, he hesitated. His gaze swept over her, lingering for just a second too long. Not in admiration, not in approval, in calculation. Ellie tilted her head. Something wrong? His jaw tightened. No. But as he walked past her toward the waiting car, his silence spoke louder than words. The gala was extravagant, of course. Gilded chandeliers, marble floors, champagne flowing freely. A room full of people who pretended to care about charity while ensuring their names were attached to the right causes. And at the center of it all, Bryce Harrington. He was smoother than Damien, more effortlessly charming. And unlike Damien, he wanted Ellie to know he was watching her. Ellie, Bryce greeted as he reached them. Or should I say, Mrs. Caldwell? Ellie smiled. Depends on who's asking. Bryce chuckled, but his gaze flicked to Damien, sharp with amusement. Impressive, he murmured. I have to admit, when I made that bet, I never thought you'd actually follow through. But I underestimated you, didn't I? Ellie went still. Damien didn't react. No flicker of panic, no sharp intake of breath. But she felt it. The tension. The crack beneath the surface. She forced her expression to remain neutral. What bet? Bryce smiled, slow and deliberate. Oh, come on. He didn't tell you? Ellie's fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass. Damien finally spoke, his voice cool and controlled. You're drunk, Bryce. Bryce laughed. I've barely had a drink. But nice try. Ellie didn't look at Damien. She kept her gaze locked on Bryce, because if there was a truth to uncover tonight, it wouldn't come from her husband. What was the bet? She asked again. Bryce studied her for a moment, then smirked. Ask your husband. Ellie turned her head just slightly, just enough to see Damien's perfectly unreadable expression. For the first time since this arrangement began, she felt like the fool. They left the gala in silence. The moment the car door shut behind them, Damien exhaled sharply. Bryce is an ass. Ellie turned to him, voice calm. What bet? Damien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. It doesn't matter. Ellie let out a quiet laugh. That's not an answer. Damien looked at her then, his eyes unreadable. It was nothing, Ellie. Just a drunken conversation taken too far. Her stomach twisted. Lies always sounded reasonable until you realized what they were. You married me because of a bet? She asked, voice even. Damien ran a hand down his face. Not like that. Then explain it to me. Silence. That was the answer. Ellie exhaled, nodding to herself. I see. Damien reached for her wrist. Just for a second, just enough for her to feel it, but she pulled away before he could touch her. They sat in silence for the rest of the ride. When they arrived at the penthouse, Ellie stepped out first. She didn't wait for Damien. She didn't look back. She went straight to her room, shutting the door behind her. For the first time since this marriage began, she felt every bit of the distance between them. And for the first time, she didn't just feel like an outsider. She felt like a pawn, one Damien had just lost control of. Ellie didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Bryce's words over and over. I never thought you'd actually follow through. It wasn't the bed itself that unsettled her. It was the certainty in Bryce's voice, the amusement in his eyes, the way Damien had not denied it. The truth sat between them like an unspoken war, and Ellie wasn't the type to retreat. By the time the sun rose, she had made a decision. Ellie found Damien in the kitchen, coffee in hand, already dressed in his usual sharp suit. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. Morning, he said. Ellie didn't return the greeting. Instead, she crossed her arms and met his gaze head-on. Tell me about the bet. A muscle ticked in Damien's jaw. Ellie, tell me about the bet, Damien. His grip on the coffee mug tightened. It was nothing. Bryce was drunk and he... Stop lying to me. The words rang through the kitchen like a gunshot. Damien's expression didn't change, but Ellie saw it. The slight shift in his stance, the way his eyes darkened, the way he hesitated. She had him. You married me because of a bet, she said, voice quieter now. Did you pick me at random? Or was I just convenient? Damien set his coffee down carefully, as if controlling himself. It wasn't like that. Ellie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. Damien exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You weren't random, he admitted finally. But you weren't supposed to say yes. Ellie blinked. What? I picked you because I didn't think you'd agree. She stared at him, waiting for the explanation to make sense. It didn't. That night in the cafe, he continued, I expected you to walk away. That was the whole point. A joke. A way to prove Bryce wrong. Her stomach twisted. But I didn't walk away. Damien met her gaze. No. Ellie's chest tightened. He never expected to actually marry her. This wasn't just about a bet. It was about the fact that he never wanted her here in the first place. And yet, here we are, she said, her voice strangely steady. Damien studied her, something unreadable in his expression. Here we are. A silence stretched between them. Ellie inhaled deeply. And if I left? Damien's grip on the counter tightened. Is that what you want? I want to know if you'd care, she said. He didn't answer. And that was an answer. Ellie turned and walked away. She didn't pack her bags. Not yet. She wasn't leaving, not immediately, not impulsively. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way Damien watched her, in the way the air between them felt different, heavier. For the first time since this arrangement began, Ellie had something Damien couldn't control, her choice, and she wasn't going to waste it. Ellie avoided Damien for the next 3 days. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, silent but present. She ate dinner at a different time, spent hours outside walking through the city, and when she was home, she locked herself in the guest bedroom. Damien didn't stop her. He noticed, of course he did. But instead of chasing after her, instead of apologizing or trying to explain himself further, he let her have the space, which told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to fight for this. For her. By the 4th day, Ellie woke up with a decision solidified in her mind. This marriage had always been a contract, an agreement based on appearances rather than emotions. And now? Now it felt like a game neither of them had the energy to keep playing. She had a job she could return to, a life outside of this penthouse, outside of him. It was time to go. She spent the afternoon looking at apartments, small places that felt real, normal. The idea of waking up in a space that belonged only to her, without the weight of secrets pressing against the walls, was intoxicating. It was only when she got back to the penthouse that she realized Damien was home earlier than usual. He was standing by the bar, a drink in hand. But he wasn't drinking. He was just staring at the glass, his expression unreadable. Ellie hesitated in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien said, voice low, "Are you leaving?" Ellie's pulse jumped. Would it matter? She asked. Something flickered in his eyes. Something sharp and unguarded, there and gone in an instant. Yes, he said simply. Ellie exhaled. Why? Damien set his drink down and turned to fully face her. Because I don't want you to. A bitter laugh escaped her. That's not a reason, Damien. That's a demand. His jaw tightened. No, it's not. Ellie crossed her arms. Then give me one good reason why I should stay. Damien held her gaze, his silence stretching between them, heavy and charged. But he had no answer. And that was it. That was everything. Ellie nodded, stepping back. That's what I thought. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding, her fingers curling into fists to keep them steady. This was over. It had to be. But the universe had other plans. The next morning, Ellie woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. At first, she ignored it, rolling over, determined to enjoy the last few hours of sleep before she officially packed her things and left. But then it buzzed again, and again. Frowning, she reached for it. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her gut told her to answer. Hello? A low chuckle came through the line. Morning, Mrs. Caldwell. Or should I say, Miss Dawson? Ellie froze. She didn't recognize the voice, but something about it made her skin crawl. Who is this? You don't know me, the man said, amusement dripping from every word. But I know you. And more importantly, I know why you're really here. Ellie sat up, gripping the phone tighter. Excuse me? Come on, the voice continued, as if they were sharing an inside joke. We both know this marriage isn't real. But I have to wonder, does Damien know the real reason you said yes? Ellie's stomach dropped. The man chuckled again. Tell him, Mrs. Caldwell, or I will. And then the line went dead. Ellie stared at the screen, her pulse hammering in her ears. Who the hell was that? And how did he know? She'd spent the last few days thinking she had all the pieces to this game. But now? Now she realized she'd been playing on someone else's board all along. Ellie sat frozen, the weight of the phone in her hand suddenly unbearable. We both know this marriage isn't real. But does Damien know the real reason you said yes? Her pulse pounded in her ears. Whoever that was, they weren't guessing. They knew something. Something she had never intended to surface. The air in the penthouse felt suffocating. She needed to think, needed to figure out what the hell was going on. But her body was already moving before she could stop herself. She stormed out of the bedroom, feet silent against the polished floors, heading straight for the one person who might have answers. Damien. She found him in his office, standing behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. His phone was in his hand, and from the tension in his stance, she knew something was wrong. He looked up as she entered. Ellie, did you tell anyone? She cut in, voice sharp. His brow furrowed. Tell anyone what? Ellie exhaled, trying to steady herself. About our marriage. That it's not what it seems. Damien's expression didn't change, but she knew him well enough now to see the subtle shift. The way his fingers curled slightly against his desk, the way his jaw tensed. I didn't say anything, he said carefully. Why? Ellie held up her phone. Because someone just called me. Some anonymous number. They know, Damien. And they think they know more. His eyes darkened. What did they say? Ellie hesitated. She could still hear the voice, smooth and taunting, threading through her mind. Does Damien know the real reason you said yes? She should tell him. She should come clean. But her instincts screamed no. Not yet. Not when she didn't know who was behind this. They just implied that our marriage isn't real, she said instead. That it's a game. Damien exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. It's a threat, he muttered. Someone trying to shake you. To shake me. Ellie crossed her arms. And what are you going to do about it? He looked at her, his gaze unreadable. I'll handle it. Ellie let out a humorless laugh. Oh, that's reassuring. Should I just sit here and wait for another mystery call? Damien's expression hardened. No, you should trust me. Ellie stared at him, something sharp twisting in her chest. That was the problem. She didn't. Ellie paced her bedroom for hours, phone gripped tightly in her hand. She had tried tracing the number, but it was blocked. Nothing to track, nothing to trace back. This wasn't just a random prank. Someone was watching. And worse, they knew exactly where to hit. By midnight, she couldn't take it anymore. If Damien was going to keep secrets, she needed to uncover her own truths. She grabbed her coat and slipped out of the penthouse, heart hammering. The address she searched for wasn't hard to find. A brownstone in Brooklyn, a place she hadn't been in years. She hesitated before knocking, but when the door swung open, revealing the older man on the other side, she knew she couldn't turn back. Ellie. His voice was hoarse with disbelief. My God, I thought. She forced a small smile. Hi, Dad. Thomas Dawson looked older than she remembered. Lines on his face deeper, hair grayer. But his eyes, sharp and calculating, were exactly the same, just like hers. He exhaled, stepping aside. You shouldn't be here. Ellie walked in anyway. The house smelled the same. Old books, coffee, something faintly metallic in the air. The walls were still lined with his work. Newspaper clippings, old case files, things that had once ruined their lives. She turned to face him. Someone called me. Thomas stilled. What did they say? That they know why I married Damien. Her father's eyes darkened. And does he? Ellie swallowed. No. Thomas sighed, rubbing his forehead. Ellie, you swore to stay out of this. I did, she admitted. But now someone else is dragging me back in. Her father looked at her, the weight of their past thick between them. You have two choices, he said quietly. Tell him the truth before they do. Or walk away before this gets worse. Ellie clenched her fists. She had already tried walking away. And somehow, she knew, this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ellie left her father's house with her pulse still unsteady. The cold night air bit at her skin as she wrapped her coat tighter around her. The city moved around her, horns blaring, lights flickering, people rushing past. But inside her mind, there was nothing but silence. Tell him the truth before they do. Or walk away before this gets worse. Her father's words had been simple, straightforward. And yet, neither choice felt possible. She hailed a cab, sliding into the back seat with a sharp breath. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Where to? Ellie hesitated. Where to? If she were smart, she'd go somewhere else. A hotel? A quiet rental in a part of town where Damien Caldwell would never think to look for her. But instead, she heard herself say, Upper East Side, the penthouse, home, or at least it should have been. The ride felt longer than usual, every stoplight stretching out like a warning. She shouldn't be going back. She should have a plan. But as the cab pulled up in front of the towering building, as the doorman immediately recognized her and ushered her inside, she realized something even worse. She had no idea what she was going to do next. The penthouse was quiet when she stepped inside. Too quiet. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she moved toward the living room. A lamp was on, casting a dim glow across the space, and for a second, she thought maybe Damien wasn't home. Then she saw him, standing near the bar, glass in hand. Eyes locked onto her the second she stepped into view. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, like he had been waiting. Her breath caught. He looks tired. It wasn't something she had ever associated with him before. Damien was always composed, always in control. But now, standing there in the dim light, something in his expression was different. And that was when she realized. He was angry. Where were you? His voice was low, even, but there was no mistaking the tension beneath it. Ellie hesitated. Excuse me? Damien set his drink down with deliberate slowness. You left without a word. You didn't answer your phone. She glanced down at her screen. 3 missed calls. She hadn't even heard it ring. Ellie crossed her arms. You track me now? Don't turn this around, Damien said sharply. I asked you a question. Her breath came faster now. I needed air. You don't even like air, he shot back. Ellie let out a humorless laugh. And what do you know about what I like? Silence. A sharp, cutting silence that stretched between them. Then Damien stepped closer. Did you meet someone? Ellie's stomach twisted. Not in the way you think. She forced herself to hold his gaze. Why do you care? Damien exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Because someone is threatening you, and you think you can just go wandering around the city like it doesn't matter? His voice wasn't just sharp. It was furious. Ellie blinked. I didn't know you were capable of worrying. Damien's jaw clenched. Don't test me right now, Ellie. She studied him. The controlled fury in his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled into fists at his sides. It wasn't just about control anymore. It was something else. Something messier. Something neither of them had the language for. I'm handling it, she said, her voice quieter now. Damien exhaled, shaking his head. You don't even know what you're handling. No, but she knew who she was handling. And that was the real problem. She had spent weeks believing Damien was the only one with secrets, that she was the one observing, calculating, untangling the truth. But somewhere along the way, she had become one of the secrets, too. And if Damien ever found out why she was really here, it wouldn't just be this marriage that fell apart. It would be her. The past isn't buried. Hours later, Ellie lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. She had spent years thinking she had outrun her past, that if she moved far enough, built a life away from the wreckage, it wouldn't follow. But now it was calling her directly. We both know this marriage isn't real. But does Damien know the real reason you said yes? Ellie clenched her fists, heartbeat thrumming wildly. Whoever had called her wasn't bluffing. But the worst part? They weren't wrong. Ellie had met Damien by chance. That part had been real. The proposal, the contract, the cold arrangement, that had all been his idea. But her yes? Her agreement to this insane marriage? That had come from something else entirely. Something rooted in the past. Something tied to him. And now, someone out there knew it. Ellie sat up, running a hand down her face. If she stayed, she was putting herself in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. But if she left, she might never find out who was pulling the strings. And worse, she might never see Damien again. The thought shouldn't have hurt, but it did. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. A decision in the dark. Damien wasn't asleep either. He stood by the massive window of the penthouse, looking out over the city, the whiskey in his hand long forgotten. He had spent years keeping his emotions in check, years ensuring that nothing and no one could shake him. But Ellie shook him, every damn day. And now, something was off. She was keeping something from him, something that had nothing to do with the bet, or their arrangement, or the careful balance they had created. Something bigger. Damien wasn't a fool. Whatever she was hiding, someone else already knew. And if there was one thing Damien Caldwell never tolerated, it was being the last to know. Damien stood by the window of his office as the late afternoon light washed over the skyline. He had barely moved for the past half hour, gaze fixed on the hustle below, hands clasped behind his back. The city never slept or slowed, and that used to comfort him. It was proof that the world kept turning on his command, that his influence reached farther than most people could comprehend. But now, none of that felt as solid as it once had. The one variable he hadn't accounted for, the single factor he couldn't control, had a name and a quiet determination he found both maddening and strangely compelling. He replayed the security footage in his mind. Ellie slipping out in the middle of the night, keeping her phone close to her side as if she expected it to ring. That single act made something twist sharply in his chest. She didn't trust him. She was sneaking around. It shouldn't have bothered him so much. Their marriage was a contract, after all, a means to an end that had always been more about public image and private wagers than genuine intimacy. He had never asked her for affection. She had never asked him for honesty. But now he wanted answers, and the fact that she wasn't providing them sparked a cold, bitter anger he couldn't simply dismiss. When he finally left his office, the air in the penthouse felt charged. He sensed Ellie's presence before he saw her, as if his mind had become trained to notice every shift of her shadow, every whisper of her movement. The thought irritated him. He was supposed to be immune to such feelings, above the sort of entanglements that made men lose their edge. Yet here he was, caught in a silent battle of wills with a woman who had never promised him anything except that she would play her part. He found her in the living room, flipping through news channels with the volume low. She didn't look up when he approached, though he knew she was aware of him. He stood at the edge of the room and let his gaze sweep over her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, no jewelry besides the wedding ring that had become a symbol of their fractured agreement. "Did you enjoy your outing last night?" he asked, tone deceptively mild. She shifted slightly, turning off the TV rather than answering. Then she met his eyes. "It was fine." Damien studied her face. She was guarded, always guarded. But there was something else there, too. A trace of sadness, maybe, or guilt. "Fine," he echoed, stepping closer. "You left at 2 in the morning, you came back at dawn, and I'm supposed to accept fine?" Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't accept anything you can't control. That's the real problem, isn't it?" He clenched his jaw. "The problem is that I can't protect you if I don't know what's going on." Her expression hardened. "I never asked for your protection." They stood in tense silence, both of them refusing to look away. This was the nature of their marriage. Collisions of pride and avoidance, half-truths and bristling challenges. Neither knew how to break free, and maybe neither truly wanted to, because somewhere in all that tension was the only thing that felt real. Ellie turned first, crossing the room to place the remote on the table. "Look," she said quietly, "I know you're suspicious, but you said it yourself. This is all just a transaction. You needed a wife for your public image. I agreed for my own reasons. Neither of us promised the other any form of deep connection." Damien's nostrils flared. "You're using my words against me. Should I pretend otherwise?" Her voice, so calm and level, sent a spike of anger through him. Not because he hated it, but because he recognized the logic in it. He had always told himself that emotions were liabilities, that trust was dangerous unless it was strategically earned. But now he was living that reality, and it tasted like ash. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What did you do last night that you can't tell me? Who did you see?" She looked away. "No one important." He didn't believe her for a second. "You don't even lie well," he said, more harshly than he intended. "Tell me the truth." Ellie's eyes flashed with hurt or defiance. He couldn't tell which. Then she brushed past him, heading for the hallway that led to her bedroom. "I'm done talking about this." Damien caught her wrist before she could vanish. He didn't squeeze or yank. He just held on, tension humming between them. She froze, looking down at where his hand circled her arm, then slowly lifted her gaze to meet his. He spoke softly. "You're not leaving this room until I know what's going on. That phone call, the sneaking out, I'm not blind, Ellie." She swallowed. "Let go of me." There was no fear in her voice, only steel. He released her immediately, but he didn't move away, didn't give her space to escape. She stood her ground. She took a shallow breath and steadied herself. "I want to see someone who knows more about our situation than you do. That's all you need to know." Damien narrowed his eyes. "Someone who knows more about our situation? You don't think I have the right to that information?" She shook her head. "It isn't your right, not unless I decide it is. Our marriage might be a contract, but my life isn't." His voice came out low and tight. "If this affects me, it affects my company, my name, everything I've built. You agreed to that when you signed on." Ellie's jaw tensed. "I signed on because I never thought I'd have to explain myself to a man who only sees people as chess pieces." For a fleeting moment, her words hung between them, slicing through whatever civility remained. She watched his face, as though daring him to argue. He said nothing. His silence stung more than any furious rebuke, because it confirmed what she suspected. He was done playing around, and he wouldn't hesitate to bulldoze her defenses if he felt it necessary. Turning abruptly, she walked down the hall to her bedroom, shutting the door with careful finality. Damien stood there for a few seconds, fists flexing at his sides. Part of him wanted to follow her and force the truth out of her, but he knew it wouldn't work. Ellie wasn't like anyone he'd ever dealt with, and brute strength, or even unstoppable persuasion, would only make her dig her heels in deeper. He went back to the living room, paced a few steps, then headed to his study. He locked the door behind him. In the silence, he made another call. When his contact picked up, he kept his voice low. "I need everything you can find on Ellie Dawson. Everything. Focus on family connections, older records, anything that might explain her behavior. She's had contact with someone recently, someone who might have a vendetta. Track her movements this past week. Cross-reference phone records, discreetly. I don't want her frightened or spooked." The voice on the other end assured him they would get started right away. Damien ended the call and set his phone aside, resisting the urge to hurl it against the wall. He hated feeling like the last person in the room to know what was happening. He dropped into the leather chair behind his desk and stared at the documents he'd been neglecting for days. Work usually anchored him, provided a sense of control that his personal life never did. But tonight, the sight of the spreadsheets and contracts only reminded him how precarious his situation had become. Ellie wasn't just some nuisance he could manage with a simple conversation or an exchange of money. She was his wife, at least on paper, and her actions reflected on him in ways he couldn't predict. Worse, he found himself actually caring about what she did, how she felt, why she was so determined to keep him in the dark. That contradiction, wanting to trust her but refusing to be blindsided, twisted him in knots. He poured himself a drink he didn't want, staring at the amber liquid swirling in the glass. A memory surfaced. Ellie's face the night she discovered the bet, the hurt flashing in her eyes. He hadn't known what to say then, and he still didn't. At the time, it had all seemed so simple. Marry a woman who didn't fit his usual profile, prove a point to Bryce Harrington, and move on with his life. He never expected Ellie to accept. He never expected to be in this maze of lies and half-truths, losing track of the reasons he'd started it all in the first place. Outside, the city lights glimmered, 1,000 possibilities stretching across the skyline. He could almost pretend it was just another night, that he was still the man who never lost control. But deep down, he knew the truth. Ellie Dawson had unsettled him from the moment she sassed him in that cafe. Now she was dismantling his well-ordered world piece by piece. He downed the drink in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to quell the turmoil in his mind. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no clear next step. All he had was the certainty that something was about to break. When he finally stood, he walked to his office door, hand resting on the knob. He could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic below. Down the hallway, Ellie was probably wide awake, struggling with her own secrets. A surge of conflicting emotions coursed through him. He wanted to force the truth out of her. He wanted to protect her from whatever threat lurked in the shadows. He wanted to walk away before either of them caused any more damage. But he knew he couldn't do any of those things without risking everything. So he stayed there, unmoving, trapped between fury and something that felt dangerously close to need. She was the only one who had ever stood up to him in a way that made him question himself. She was also the only one who could betray him so completely that it might destroy him. He let go of the door, heading back to his desk. He needed more information, and soon. Otherwise, he might do something reckless that he'd regret forever. As the night pressed on, he busied himself with phone calls and hush-hush inquiries, determined to uncover Ellie Dawson's secrets before it was too late. In her room, Ellie stared at the ceiling, every muscle in her body tense. She didn't know how long she could keep her life in two separate pieces. Sooner or later, Damien would find out the real reason she'd agreed to this sham. The unknown caller was a ticking bomb, waiting to detonate. And her father had made it clear that if she didn't reveal the truth, someone else would. She closed her eyes, trying to shut it all out. But the weight of her choices pressed down on her, making it impossible to find rest. She wondered if Damien was pacing the penthouse, furious at her secrecy, or if he'd managed to return to his familiar stoicism. Either way, she suspected neither of them would sleep that night. Tomorrow would bring another round of lies, guarded conversations, and searching glances. It was only a matter of time before the tension snapped, pulling them both under. As the dark hours stretched on, Ellie could only lie there and wait, listening to the faint rhythm of her own heartbeat, bracing herself for the inevitable collapse of the world they'd so carefully and so precariously constructed. Ellie didn't expect peace when she woke up the next morning, but she also didn't expect to find Damien already waiting for her. He stood in the kitchen, perfectly dressed in a charcoal suit, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone sent a sharp warning through her body. He knew something, or at least, he suspected more than he had last night. Ellie took her time walking toward the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee as if she wasn't aware of his scrutiny. Her hands were steady, her movements deliberate. She wouldn't let him see her unravel. "You've been busy," Damien said, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. Ellie lifted an eyebrow, taking a sip before responding. "Am I supposed to ask what you mean, or should we just cut to the part where you accuse me of something?" He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No accusations. Not yet. Just an observation." She met his gaze, refusing to waver. "I went for a walk. I didn't commit a crime." Damien exhaled through his nose, tilting his head slightly as if weighing his next words. "You went to Brooklyn. To a house owned by a Thomas Dawson." Ellie's breath stilled in her chest. "No." He didn't say it like a question. He said it like a fact. She forced her fingers to relax around the mug before setting it down carefully. "You had me followed." Damien didn't deny it. "Would you have expected anything less?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Of course not. You need control over everything, don't you?" His expression didn't change. Control keeps people alive. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. He knew about her father. He had connected the dots. But how much did he really know? How much had his investigation uncovered? She lifted her chin, keeping her voice steady. "Why do you care where I went?" Damien took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Because I don't like unknown variables. And right now, you are the biggest one in my life." She inhaled sharply. "So I'm a variable now? That's what I am to you." He leaned forward slightly, resting his palms against the counter. "I don't know. You tell me, Ellie." Their eyes locked, the weight of everything unsaid stretching between them. If she told him the truth now, it would change everything. But if she lied, it would only be a matter of time before Damien found out on his own. And when he did, he would never forgive her. Ellie swallowed hard. "Thomas Dawson is my father." Damien didn't react, but she caught the flicker of something in his gaze. He had suspected it, but now it was confirmed. She continued before he could interrupt. "I want to see him because I needed answers. Someone is threatening me, Damien. Someone who knows more about our marriage than they should." His jaw tightened. "And your father is involved?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not exactly, but he has connections. He spent years exposing corruption, dismantling corporations that buried their crimes. If someone is coming after me, he might have an idea of who it is." Damien remained silent, his gaze unreadable. Ellie hated that. She hated not knowing what he was thinking. Finally, he straightened, exhaling slowly. "And what did your father say?" "That I should tell you the truth before someone else does," she admitted. Something flickered in Damien's eyes. A silent challenge. "Then do it," he said quietly. Ellie's stomach twisted. She could tell him. Right now, she could rip off the bandage and finally let the truth spill out, let him decide what to do with it. But fear held her back. Not just fear of his reaction, but fear of what it would mean if she lost the one piece of control she had left. So instead, she deflected. "Whoever is behind this isn't just trying to shake me, Damien. They're coming after you, too." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I'm not the one sneaking off in the middle of the night." Ellie clenched her fists. "No, but you are the one with 100 enemies who would love to see you destroyed. If someone is trying to use me to get to you, don't you think we should be working together instead of against each other?" Damien's expression didn't waver, but she saw it. The flicker of hesitation. She pressed forward. "Whoever called me knew about the bet, Damien. They knew. That means someone close to you is involved. Maybe Bryce, maybe someone else. But you need to start looking in your own circle before assuming I'm the problem." Damien exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You think I don't already suspect that?" Ellie studied him. He looked exhausted. More than that, he looked frustrated. For a brief moment, she saw past the cold exterior, past the arrogance and control. She saw the man who was just as trapped in this mess as she was. "Let me help," she said quietly. Damien lifted his gaze, eyes locking onto hers. "You still haven't told me what you're hiding." Ellie swallowed hard. "And you haven't told me what you're afraid of." Neither of them moved. Neither of them broke. But in that moment, something shifted. For the first time since their marriage began, the battle lines weren't so clear. And the war they were fighting might not be against each other after all. Ellie spent the rest of the morning pretending Damien's words hadn't shaken her. She told herself that she had expected this. His suspicion, his relentless need for control. He was a man who always got what he wanted, and right now, what he wanted was the truth. But some truths couldn't be told. Not yet. She paced her room, her thoughts tangled in knots. Damien had proven time and time again that he was ruthless when it came to protecting his interests. If she gave him even a fraction of what she was hiding, he wouldn't stop until he had everything. She wasn't ready for that. Not when she didn't know who was pulling the strings. Not when she didn't even know who she was up against. She needed more time. But time was running out. A knock at her door made her jump. She exhaled, steeling herself before opening it. Damien stood there, his expression unreadable. "We're going out," he said. Ellie blinked. "Excuse me?" "I have a meeting," he continued. "And you're coming with me." She crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because I don't trust you alone in this penthouse." His tone was flat, but there was something simmering beneath it. "Not after last night." Ellie clenched her jaw. "So now I need a babysitter?" Damien's lips twitched, but the amusement never reached his eyes. "Call it whatever you want. Get dressed." She considered arguing, but what was the point? He was giving her an opportunity. He just didn't realize it. Ellie turned without another word, grabbing a coat before following him out. The car ride was silent. Ellie watched the city blur past, her mind working through the possibilities. Damien rarely took her anywhere outside of social obligations. If he wanted her at this meeting, it wasn't just about keeping an eye on her. It was about sending a message. To who? She wasn't sure. But she was going to find out. They pulled up to a high-rise downtown, the kind of building that screamed power and wealth. A valet opened Ellie's door before she could process where they were. Damien placed a hand at the small of her back, guiding her inside. His touch was light, but firm enough to make it clear. This was about appearances. She played along. The elevator ride was tense. She could feel the weight of his stare, as if he was still trying to decipher her, still deciding how much of a threat she really was. When the doors opened, a man was already waiting. Ellie recognized him instantly. Bryce Harrington. Her stomach twisted, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. Bryce, as always, looked like he belonged in a room full of kings. A tailored suit, a confident smirk, and the air of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. "Well, well," Bryce said, his gaze flicking between them. "Didn't expect the wife to join us today." Ellie smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Damien and I do everything together." Bryce's smirk deepened. "Is that so?" Damien didn't respond. He simply led Ellie into the conference room, taking a seat at the head of the table. Ellie sat beside him, her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could feel Bryce watching her. She didn't react. Damien steepled his fingers, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You leaked it." Ellie's breath hitched. Bryce raised an eyebrow. "Leaked what?" Damien didn't blink. "The bet. The marriage." His voice dropped lower. The phone call Ellie received. Bryce's smirk faltered for just a second. A flicker of something sharp crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, but it was gone just as quickly. "Now, why would I do that?" Bryce said smoothly. "Because you like watching people burn," Damien said. Ellie held her breath. Bryce let out a quiet laugh, leaning back in his chair. "You give me too much credit, Caldwell. If I wanted to ruin you, I wouldn't be so subtle." Damien didn't look away. "Then who?" Bryce tilted his head. "I have no idea, but I'll tell you this. Whoever it is, they know exactly where to hit you." His eyes flickered to Ellie. "And you?" Ellie forced herself to stay still. Bryce grinned. "So tell me, sweetheart, how does it feel to be in the middle of a war you didn't see coming?" Ellie exhaled slowly. I've been in worse places. Bryce chuckled, shaking his head. I like her, Caldwell. She's got fire. Damien's jaw clenched. Bryce stood, straightening his jacket. Whatever game is being played here, I'm not the one pulling the strings. But I'd start looking closer to home. Damien didn't respond. Neither did Ellie. Bryce turned to leave, then paused at the door. One last thing, he said, glancing at Ellie. You should be careful. People who play too many sides usually end up alone. The words sent a chill down her spine. Then he was gone. The silence in the room was deafening. Damien was the first to move, standing abruptly. Let's go. Ellie followed without question, but her mind was already spinning. Bryce was arrogant, but he wasn't a liar. If he wasn't behind the leak, then who was? And why did it feel like they were just getting started? Damien was tense on the drive back. Ellie could feel it in the way his fingers curled against his knee, the way his jaw remained locked in place. She took a slow breath. You think he's telling the truth? Damien exhaled through his nose. He's many things, but he wouldn't waste his time lying about this. Ellie nodded. So that means someone else is coming for us. A shiver ran down her spine. The car pulled up to the penthouse. Damien got out first, his pace sharp, his body language stiff. Ellie followed him inside, closing the door behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien turned, his gaze dark. I need to know what else you're hiding. Ellie's breath caught. She should tell him. She should end this before it was too late. But the words wouldn't come. Damien shook his head, his lips curling into something bitter. That's what I thought. He turned and walked away. Ellie stood frozen, heart hammering in her chest. Outside, the city kept moving. But inside these walls, the war had just begun.